Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Education for the 2023 legislative session. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblyman De Silva.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson. Assemblywoman Hardy. Assemblyman Koenig. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Assemblyman MacArthur. Assemblywoman Mosca. Assemblywoman Taylor. Assemblywoman Thomas. Assemblywoman Torres. Chair Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, and please mark Assemblywoman Torres here. I think she just stepped out for a second, but I have seen her. Okay, well, welcome to everyone here in the audience in Carson City. I don't think we have Vegas today, but those of you watching over the internet and on our YouTube page, please silence your electronic devices if you haven't already. If you wish to testify, please sign in the table and please give a card to our committee secretary so we can spell your name correctly in the minutes. When testifying, please turn on your microphone, clearly state and spell your name, any affiliation for the record, then turn your microphone off each time you are done speaking. Please bring handouts of anything for members of the public and put them on the table over there. Electronic copies should be submitted to our committee manager by 24 hours before our committee meeting. So yesterday would have been great. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions. We don't always have to agree with each other, but we can still be nice to each other. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documentation. Please don't view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. Finally, please note that we will limit our bill testimony to 20-minute windows. We'll have 20 minutes of support, followed by 20 minutes of opposition and 20 minutes of neutral. With that, let's get started. We're going to start our meeting with a work session, although we're going to start with a work session as soon as Assemblywoman Torres makes it back in. And then we will hear one bill, Assembly Bill 296. And here she is. Today we will conduct the work session to take action on measures the committee has heard in previous meetings. It's not customary for the committee to take testimony or otherwise rehear the bills during a work session. However, I may invite a witness to come forward for clarification or questions during consideration of a measure. We'll be having 12 bills on work session. As you know, we are right up against a deadline. So this is going to kind of be the way we look for the next, today and next week. We have Assembly Bill. Okay, I'm not going to read them all. You guys have them. We'll start with Assembly Bill 82, and I'll turn it over to Alex Drozdoff. 42, I'm sorry. I've got a lot on my plate, people.
Thank you, Chair. Alex Drozdoff, Committee Policy Analyst for the record. As nonpartisan staff, I cannot support nor oppose any measure. The first bill on work session is Assembly Bill 42, which revises provisions relating to class sizes. The committee heard this bill on February 14th. Assembly Bill 42 makes various changes relating to class sizes. It increases the maximum pupil-teacher ratios in kindergarten through grade 3 and prescribes maximum ratios in certain courses for grades 4 through 12. The bill also makes changes to the variance process. Furthermore, the bill eliminates the ability for a school district to comply with certain alternative pupil-teacher ratios. Additionally, it requires NDE to develop guidance concerning the use of money for the purposes of reducing pupil-teacher ratios and eliminate certain requirements of NDE regarding certain policy development and communication. Finally, the bill makes certain provisions applicable to charter schools, university schools, and each campus of a school that operates at different campuses. NDE submitted an amendment adding charter schools and university schools to certain provisions of Section 5 and outlining certain requirements concerning class size variances for such schools. The amendment also leaves in the alternative pupil-teacher ratios for certain school districts. Next, NDE submitted an amendment returning the pupil-teacher ratio for kindergarten and grades 1 and 2 to 16:1 and grade 3 to 18:1. The amendment also restores language concerning alternative ratio plans. And Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch submitted an amendment that adds science and social studies as classes that require certain pupil-teacher ratios for grades 4 through 12 and specifies when this change would take effect. The amendment also makes additions relating to pupil counselor ratios and certain reporting requirements for school districts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a comment. I wanted the record to reflect that Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch and I worked in that amendment together so that it's known that we worked together to put that in. So, thank you.
Thank you. Duly noted. So it was, and thank you for your work on that.
I just wanted to comment that I really appreciate the amount of work that happened over the last 48 hours when it came to both adding the subjects, as well as clarifications around grades 7 through 12. Realized that the Department of Ed worked very diligently with the two assembly members that were just mentioned. And so just wanted to express my thanks as well for that as we continue to address the issues of class sizes in our state.
Thank you. Yes, we have a committee who is very able and willing and to take up those tasks, and I do thank the Department of Ed for working with our members as well. So with that, I would take a motion to amend and do pass. Vice Chair has made the motion. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Assemblywoman Anderson. Any discussions on the motion? You haven't, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know there's been a lot of work going, especially in the last few hours. I'm going to have to be no at this point. I've got a lot of feedback from my districts that I'm trying to work with. I cover an awful lot of school districts. So there are some fiscal concerns that we're still working through. And so maybe we can get some comfort by the time we get to the floor. But for now, I'm sorry, I'll have to be a no in committee.
That is fine. Thank you very much. Okay. With that, we will all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Nay. And if I could have a raise of hands, we've got Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblyman Koenig, Assemblyman MacArthur, and Assemblywoman Hardy as a nay. But motion carries. Ms. Drozdoff, can you please do our next, what? Oh, floor statement. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Next work session.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 65, which revises provisions relating to education. The committee heard this bill on February 21st. Assembly Bill 65 makes various changes relating to education. It revises provisions relating to defining bullying and investigating and reporting certain instances of bullying, cyberbullying, and discrimination based on race. Furthermore, it requires that the superintendent, rather than the State Board of Education, approve work-based learning programs, and it makes changes to teacher and administrator evaluation requirements. The bill also makes certain changes relating to kindergarten and starting school. Finally, AB 65 makes various changes to school discipline related to restorative justice. NDE submitted an amendment removing the changes related to restorative justice in sections 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 13, 14, and 15. And Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch submitted an amendment removing the new language in sections 10 and 11, which relates to teacher and administrator evaluations. Furthermore, the amendment revises the mandatory age for starting school, as outlined in NRS 392040, to 6 years of age. It requires that a child complete kindergarten and make certain changes to the bill language concerning the birth date parameters for starting kindergarten. Finally, it removes all language regarding school start dates for children who are 7 years of age, and it specifies that language relating to age changes in Section 12 will be effective starting in school year 2024-2025. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you. And I apologize. It's when these amendments are kind of down to the last minute, and I know that that's just the process. So I was really comfortable with this, and then the amendment has had me to have some questions. So in regards to the amendment, Section 12, striking out, if I'm understanding it right, and maybe if somebody, I'm sure somebody will address this. We were going to have an assessment by the school district or charter school if applicable for, those that are going to be admitted to first grade. But now it just says if the child has not completed kindergarten, be admitted to kindergarten at the beginning of that school year. We know in Nevada, school attendance is not compelled until 7 years of age. So what happens to a child that has not gone to school yet and they're maybe 7, going to go to school? Do they not have the ability to be assessed, to be put into first grade and skip kindergarten?
Thank you. The amendment changes that, so school's age would start at 6 in Nevada.
Okay, so a 7-year-old
Should have started school the year before.
so when the 7-year-old comes to school now, to the school district, will be in first grade or kindergarten?
You want to speak? So Asher can speak to this, but I imagine there would be a year of grandfathered in, but the point of the amendment was to change school start age to 6 years old. And I would just like to to say anecdotally that up until a couple of years, you could be tried as an adult in Nevada at age 8, and we didn't make kids start school until 7. So just little chair's prerogative. But Asher, if you'd like to address that, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So the net effect of this amendment would be that there would be a transition year before mandatory start at age 6 would take effect. And for that transition year, the provisions of existing law would remain in effect. So for a child who is coming to school for the first time at age 7, if they've completed kindergarten and first grade, they would be admitted to the second grade. If they've only completed kindergarten, they would be admitted to first grade. If they haven't completed any education, they would be given an assessment and placed into either kindergarten or first grade on the basis of that assessment. And then after that transition year, all children would be required to start by the age of 6. And the provisions of existing law for children who start at age 6 would control, which would have the child either placed into kindergarten if they haven't completed kindergarten or first grade if they have completed kindergarten.
Thank you for that. So that gave me some clarity. There would be an assessment for those children, but the age is dropping to 6 by the amendment. So, okay, thank you. I still have some concerns, but we'll get this going out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to remind the Assemblywoman, this was discussed pretty robustly during the hearing, and it seemed to be the will of the committee at the time. So, but thank you, and of course, you can always reserve your right. Any other questions, members? Okay. With that, I will entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch has made the motion. Do I have a second? Second from Assemblywoman Anderson. Any questions on the motion?
I promise I'm not going to be this chatty the rest of the time. I'm a lot of yeses, people. A lot of yeses are coming. So I was fine with the bill before. The amendment, pulling out 7 at this point. I'm gonna say yes with reservation. Do some homework. So reserving my right for the floor, but with some reservations, I'll be a mild yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just ask that you. Anybody else want to say the same thing? Okay. Assemblywoman Hardy, you're saying the same?
Same.
Okay.
Yeah.
With that, I will say all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. We have one nay from Assemblyman MacArthur. So motion carries. And I will actually take that floor statement. Okay, next is Assembly Bill 72. Ms. Drozdoff?
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 72, which creates the Advisory Committee on the Safety and Well-Being of Teachers. The committee heard this bill on March 7th. Assembly Bill 72 creates the Advisory Committee on the Safety and Well-Being of Teachers and outlines certain provisions for the Advisory Committee, including its membership, term details for members, and certain conditions guiding meetings and members. The bill also outlines the duties of the Advisory Committee. Assemblywoman Anderson proposed an amendment altering the membership of the advisory committee, specifically increasing the membership from 9 to 13 voting members, requiring all appointments by the governor to be licensed pursuant to Chapter 391 of NRS, and at least 4 of those people to be classroom teachers, adding 1 education support professional employed by a school district who works primarily at a single public school appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, adding 1 education support professional employed by a school district who works primarily for the school district and is assigned to multiple public schools appointed by the Speaker, adding 1 administrator of an elementary school in this state appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, and adding 1 administrator of a high school in this state appointed by the Speaker. The amendment also revises the name of the body to the Advisory Committee on the Safety and Well-Being of Public School Staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Okay. Assemblywoman Hanson.
I was that kid in school. Okay, I love this. I'm fine. I'm fine with this bill. But I just had a question. I saw the amendment, fine. But I remember the discussion in the committee. There was a really good suggestion by Assemblywoman Torres about, and I think, Chair, you agreed. I was just curious if we're going to see it eventually. The idea that the report due date be in August or the first part of September, and then this would give an opportunity to legislators to maybe bring a BDR in relationship to what this committee, because Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch mentioned, advisory committees can be a little frustrating because they don't have action items, and this might give us that ability. So just wanting to know that that's out there still.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. For some reason that did not get captured, but I will make sure that if it'll either be a floor amendment or we'll get it on the other side. So, but that was a great idea, and I definitely agreed. Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for bringing up the report due date. I knew I had not captured something that we had all talked about, and I couldn't remember what. I really appreciate the Chair having the conversation with me and a few others about making sure that it's more than the teachers that are being represented. In particular, one reason why I asked for 4 of the 5 to be of the licensed individuals is this way so our counselors and our speech language pathologists could also be possibly a part of this, because they oftentimes are meeting in a very small room with students. And then also adding in our bus drivers or substitute teachers under the area of those assigned to multiple public schools would allow for, again, a stronger discussion. So I really appreciate the Chair's work on this with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
To amend and do passed. So moved. From Assemblywoman Anderson, do I have a second? Second by Vice Chair Taylor. Members, do we have any discussion on the motion? Okay. With that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and I will give that floor statement to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, we will go to work session AB 73. Ms. Drozdoff?
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 73, which provides the right of public school pupils to wear certain adornments at school graduation ceremonies. The committee heard this bill on March 7th. Assembly Bill 73 establishes that a public school pupil, including a pupil of a university school, is entitled to wear traditional tribal regalia or recognized objects of religious or cultural significance as an adornment at a high school graduation ceremony. The bill also outlines the abilities of certain school governance bodies to prohibit items that may cause a substantial disruption or material interference with the ceremony. Assemblywoman Anderson submitted an amendment providing that if an item is prohibited, a pupil may petition for an appeal through the superintendent in consultation with the Nevada Indian Commission and Nevada Commission on Minority Affairs. The amendment further specifies that the appeal should contain an explanation of the cultural connection, and the appeal should be resolved within 5 days. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Assemblywoman Hanson.
I just want to clarify that I read the bill right. I support the bill completely. I think there was some confusion if somehow the cap or the gowns were being not utilized, but if legal could just reinforce the idea that in Section 1, Sub 3A, not replacing the cap and gown customarily worn at school graduation ceremonies. We're not replacing caps. They'll still have their cap.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. Yes, so the provisions of Section 1 of the bill allow pupils to wear tribal regalia or recognized objects of religious or cultural significance as adornments at a graduation ceremony. And then the definition of adornment is something attached to, worn with, but not replacing the cap and gown customarily worn. So the cap and gown would still be required to be worn.
Thank you, Mr. Killian. Any other questions? Assemblywoman MacArthur.
This isn't a question, but I'll be voting yes, but reserve my right.
Thank you very much. We just ask that you stay in touch. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman De Silva has made the motion. Assemblywoman Mosca has seconded. Any discussions on the motion? Okay, with that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and I will give that floor statement to Assemblyman De Silva. Next we have Assembly Bill 118. Ms. Drozdoff.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 118, which revises provisions relating to ENCHE. The committee heard this bill on March 2nd. Assembly Bill 118 makes certain changes concerning the Board of Regents. Specifically, it revises overall membership from 13 to 9 members, revises terms to 4-year periods, and outlines provisions concerning election districts, dates, and terms. No amendments were proposed for this measure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion to do pass. Assemblywoman Torres has made the motion. Do I have a second? Second by Vice Chair Taylor. Any discussion on the motion? Assemblywoman Hardy?
Thank you, Chair. I'll continue to work with the sponsors and stakeholders on the bill, so I'll vote it out of committee at this time, but reserve my right.
Thank you. Assemblyman Koenig? Same? Ditto. Okay, thank you. And Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I support the changes of the terms, but I do also share some concerns just about the limiting the numbers. So I will vote out of committee, but I'd also like to reserve my right.
Thank you. And as a reminder, you always have the right to change your vote. We just ask that you tell me and the bill sponsor. So if you plan to change your vote. So thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. And that was Assemblywoman Hanson and Assemblyman MacArthur. Nay. Motion carries. And I will assign, who would like that floor statement? Assemblywoman Moscow. Well, yeah, but he's not even here. It's customary to give it to a, I don't know how you do it in your committee. I'm just kidding. I'm teasing. We all love each other. Okay, next we have Assembly Bill 150. Ms. Drozdoff.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 150, which revises provisions governing the waiver of certain fees by the Board of Regents. The committee heard this bill on March 2nd. Assembly Bill 150 outlines requirements for the Board of Regents to grant certain fee waivers to Native American students. To receive such a fee waiver, a student must, among other conditions, have been a resident of the state, resided on certain qualified tribal land, or both. It also adds provisions for granting waivers for certain dual credit courses and specifies that a student must complete the FAFSA unless the student is enrolled exclusively in dual credit courses. Assemblywoman Anderson submitted an amendment adding criteria under which a student may be granted a waiver. The amendment also expands the waiver used for all programs, and it includes eligibility for a high school student enrolled in a credit-bearing course at an ENCHE institution. Further, it removes the year residency requirement and certain conditions concerning FAFSA. Finally, it proposes funding at $450,000 a year for the biennium. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Assemblywoman Anderson.
More of a comment. I'm continuing to work with Nevada System of Higher Education on cleaning up some language because there's one or two little areas that are a little bit wonky, for lack of a better term. And yes, that's a legal term, just so you know. I will not ask our wonderful attorney to define what that is exactly. But I really wanted to thank Mr. Rodriguez, who worked with me up until I think it was about 3:45 yesterday on trying to get that language. And we just decided not to try to muddy the waters and bring it up to this committee, but if it is sent to another committee, to bring up that other language. So again, just wanted to thank Nevada System of Higher Education for working on making sure this language is accurate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And with that, I will entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Anderson had just made the motion. Do I have a second? Second from Assemblywoman Torres. Any discussions on the motion? Okay. With that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and I will give that floor statement to Ms. Anderson. Next, we have Assembly Bill 175.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 175, which revises provisions governing boards of trustees of school districts. The committee heard this bill on March 9th. Assembly Bill 175 adjusts the composition of the Board of Trustees of certain school districts to provide for the election of 4 of the 7 members, while outlining conditions for the appointment of the remaining 3 members. The board also outlines provisions relating to election districts, duties of the appointing authority, terms of office, and vacancies. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod submitted an amendment specifying that this bill will be specific to Clark County School District and will no longer include Washoe County School District, though it does provide for permissive language for the other county school districts. The amendment also retains 7 elected members in the identified district and adds 4 non-voting appointed members, specifying the appointment process for such members. Furthermore, the amendment clarifies certain roles and responsibilities of the non-voting appointed members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Are there any questions? Okay, with that, I would take a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Torres has made the motion. Assemblyman De Silva has seconded the motion. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll make the same statement. I'm still working with discussion with stakeholders and sponsors, so I will vote it out of committee at this time.
Thank you. And like I said, we just appreciate the discussion, so let us know if you change. Okay, with that, I will say all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Can I have a show of hands? We have Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch, Assemblywoman Anderson, and Assemblyman MacArthur. Are nays? Motion carries. And I will assign, I'll take that one. I don't want to put anyone else out there. All right, thank you. And with that, we will go to Assembly Bill 185.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 185, which revises provisions governing the education of pupils who are children of military personnel. The committee heard this bill on March 14th. Assembly Bill 185 requires the governing body of a charter school or university school, in addition to the superintendent of a school district, to take certain actions relating to military transfers that impact pupils. First, it states that such bodies shall authorize a pupil who plans to transfer schools due to the documented pending military transfer of a parent or legal guardian to enroll in the school and participate in any application or lottery process necessary to be eligible for enrollment. It also specifies if a student plans to leave a school during a school year due to such military transfers, the school governance shall make reasonable efforts to accommodate the student. Assemblywoman Mosca submitted an amendment that deems the military installation's address to be the address used by the pupil for enrollment purposes until the pupil establishes a different address. Such a pupil shall provide certain proof of residency prior to the beginning of the subsequent school year. Finally, the amendment authorizes the pupil and a parent or legal guardian to specify an additional address to be used solely for the purpose of receiving correspondence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Assemblywoman Mosca.
Thank you, Chair. A comment, I just wanted to thank everybody on the committee for the suggestion of making sure that pupils could show that they actually did move there. So that's why we added it. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Mosca. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I would take a motion to amend and do pass. So moved by Assemblywoman Torres. Second by Assemblywoman Hanson. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. And that is Assemblywoman Mosca's bill, so I will give you that floor statement. Next, we have Assembly Bill 207.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 207, which revises provisions governing work-based learning programs. The committee heard this bill on March 14th. Assembly Bill 207 establishes that the Board of Trustees of a school district or the governing body of a charter school that has been approved to offer work-based learning program may purchase and maintain insurance against any liability arising out of a pupil's participation in the program. It also outlines certain conditions concerning the insurance coverage. Next, the bill explains that a school district or charter school may not charge a pupil or their parent or legal guardian for the cost of obtaining such insurance coverage. Finally, it states the Board of Trustees and charter school governing body are immune from civil liability for actions based upon the failure of such entities to obtain such insurance coverage or a particular amount thereof. The Nevada Justice Association submitted an amendment to remove subsection 3 of section 1, which concerns immunity from civil liability. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Mosca has made the motion. Do I have a second? Second from Assemblywoman Torres. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, then I will say all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously, and I will give that floor statement to Assemblyman Koenig. Next, we have Assembly Bill 217.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 217, which revises provisions governing higher education. The committee heard this bill on March 21st. Assembly Bill 217 requires the Board of Regents to waive certain fees for homeless or unaccompanied pupils. It limits the documentation the Board of Regents is required to request in such circumstances, includes provisions regarding the waiver amount, and requires that each institution designate one employee as a point of contact for fee waiver questions. The bill also makes changes to the liaison for post-secondary education for homeless pupils, and it requires NSHE institutions to take certain actions related to the liaison. The bill authorizes the Board of Regents to require an institution to provide certain students with priority registration for courses that provide certain credits. Assemblyman Watts submitted an amendment removing the authorization for the Board of Regents to grant priority registration for homeless or unaccompanied pupils and certain foster youth, and clarifying that a fee waiver shall be granted for a pupil identified as a homeless or unaccompanied pupil at any time prior to achieving age 25, and adding language requiring certain documentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Not seen any, then I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Vice Chair has made the motion, second by Assemblyman De Silva. Any discussions on the motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and I will assign that floor statement to Vice Chair Taylor. Next, we will go to Assembly Bill 256.
Thank you, Chair. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 256, which revises provisions relating to work-based learning programs. The committee heard this bill on March 21st. Assembly Bill 256 revises the definition of volunteer to exclude certain employees whose place of work participates in a work-based learning program. The bill also requires NDE to prescribe a method for a school district board of trustees to determine if a business, agency, or organization's work-based learning volunteer must follow certain fingerprinting provisions. The bill further specifies certain inclusions required of this method and outlines certain circumstances for fingerprinting exemptions. Assemblywoman Mosca submitted an amendment that requires students who participate in work-based learning to be provided training related to harassment and healthy relationships in the workplace. The amendment also clarifies that the Board of Trustees may choose whether to examine a business, agency, or organization for the purpose of exempting its employees from the requirement to submit fingerprints for a background check. If a Board of Trustees chooses not to conduct such an examination, the employees would remain subject to the provisions of existing law. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Drozdoff. Members, do we have any questions? Assemblywoman Moscow.
Thank you, Chair. And for this one, I wanted to thank Assemblywoman Torres, who had the suggestion of the First Amendment, and Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch, who had the suggestion for the Second Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned, we have a very engaged committee, and I really appreciate all the work. With that, I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Hardy has made the motion. Do I have a second? Assemblywoman Torres has seconded the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and it is your bill, Assemblywoman Moscow, so I will give you that floor statement. Finally, we have Assembly Bill 274.
Thank you, Chair. The final bill on work session is Assembly Bill 274, which revises provisions governing required instruction in financial literacy. The committee heard this bill on March 23rd. Assembly Bill 274 revises the 1/2 credit of economics in which a public school pupil must enroll to include financial literacy. The bill also adds understanding and budgeting for certain costs to the description of skills necessary to manage finances. Assemblyman Nguyen submitted an amendment that makes certain changes to the statewide Financial Literacy Council, including adjustments to its reporting and membership. Assemblyman Nguyen would also like to propose an amendment adding Assemblyman Gray as a co-sponsor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. When I spoke with Assemblymember Nguyen earlier, I was under the impression that the specific item of including a very specific assignment was going to be removed, and now I can't seem to find it. It had to do with creating a budget plan.
Assemblyman Nguyen is here in the audience.
Can I ask
You would
if
like
that
to
is
come up?
still the intent? Because I know that we had discussed that, so if you could clarify that for me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Anderson. Yui Nguyen for the record. Yes, you are correct. That was in the presentation on the hearing on the 23rd, where there was a requirement to add a requirement. Let me go back to the work document. If you look at back on the exhibit on AB 274, the original amendment, original proposed conceptual amendment, that was to add section 2 of subsection 3 to add a student must complete a financial plan as part of their course requirement. That hasn't been taken out.
That's not in the amendment currently?
Correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank you about that because I agree with the intent of the idea, but quite frankly, I think putting a specific item into law as opposed to putting it into policy or someplace that the Department of Ed could actually make those changes for is the proper place. So I greatly appreciate you understanding where I believe there are other educators on this committee and outside this committee that brought that up. So thank you for hearing those concerns.
I thought you were going to say you believe there are other educators on the committee, and I was going to say, yes, there are.
And we know it.
We know it. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass. Assemblywoman Anderson has made the motion, and Assemblywoman Torres has seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. And Assemblywoman Nguyen, I will assign you the floor statement, and Assemblywoman Thomas, you will be back up. Thank you. Okay. Okay. With that, we will close the work session and move on to our bill hearing for today. We have one bill, Assembly Bill 296. I will tell you that it is 20 after. There is a good chance that you're going to see a whole sloth of us get up and leave a few minutes before 2 because we have a joint judiciary meeting. So at that time, I will quietly turn the gavel over to my vice chair. But we will be here ready and excited to hear the bill until such time. This measure revises provisions governing instructional time in public schools. To present this measure, we have our own Assemblyman De Silva and guests, who I know you will introduce. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Assemblyman Ruben De Silva, representing Assembly District 28 in Northeast Las Vegas. I am presenting Assembly Bill 296, which seeks to revise provisions governing the utilization of certain standardized testing in our state's public schools. The bill before you today is addressing a major issue that is prevalent both in our state and in our nation at large. To quote LeVar Burton, the longtime host of the PBS Kids show, Reading Rainbow, "We test our kids too damn much." And it's a quote, so I believe I'm allowed to say that on the record.
I don't think damn is a bad word anymore. I think we have established that.
Just wanted to clarify. Okay. I would like to first begin with some brief background information as to how this problem developed. So very briefly, I know we're constrained for time. The idea of formalized testing is a kind of a newer development in like the schemata of things here. Prior to the middle of the 19th century, we didn't really have formalized testing. Schooling itself was something that was really the purview of the elite, the wealthy, the affluent. And as we move towards a more public education, to be honest with you, this idea that every child in this country should have an education, we started delving into this notion of a formalized written test. And this is something that developed throughout the course of the late 19th century. We really have an important development during the second decade of the 20th century. So in the year 1914, the National Education Association endorsed the idea of formalized, standardized testing, and the U.S. military as well would actually would put out an aptitude test for folks who wanted to enlist and join the ranks of the military. And even if you were drafted, you would have to take this aptitude test. We still have this in place today, a version of it. This is the ASVAB testing. And we see that testing does continue to develop formalized written tests at the school level, at the district level, and at the state level throughout the 20th century. A very important thing to also consider here, and I do want to mention this, is in the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This is under the Johnson administration, and this is important to consider because this was part of the anti-poverty, Great Society movement of the late 60s. And this is also a piece of legislation that really catapulted testing. So there is a concern here that we want to actually measure student performance in a weighted way. And one of the things that we embraced as a country during that time, the late 1960s, was formalized, standardized testing. And we really see, because of this act, a real proliferation of standardized testing throughout the 1970s and the 1980s. Some of you who may have grown up during those eras will remember all the bubbling in. The Scantron machine is actually developed in the early 1970s, and this really becomes how we test our students. And it's the way that we were just expected to gauge performance with young people. In the 1990s, we started having some debates about this. There's some concerns that are coming up, especially when it comes to socioeconomics and equity issues, that standardized testing is actually tying the hands of some students behind their backs, and is actually a hindrance and curtailing their growth, and not actually serving as any sort of a measurement or a catapult towards opportunity or success. The real some will say the low point in all of this is probably in the early 2000s when we passed the No Child Left Behind Act. And the notion there being that standardized testing is the ultimate measure. It's how we measure all student aptitude, all student performance, all student growth levels. And that's really when this issue starts really becoming to a head. I was in high school at the time and in college, minoring in education. My major was history. And this was one of the big talking points and the big discussions of the time. Standardized testing, what do we do about it? Fast forward about 10 years, in 2015-16, we start implementing the Every Student Succeeds Act with this notion now that the testing shouldn't be brought down from the federal level all the way down to the local level, to the states and to the districts and to the schools, but that states should have some control as to how we go about utilizing and administering standardized testing. And this is also important because this idea of what we're going to be talking about in this bill today, a cap, is first actually mentioned. And this is something that comes from the philosophy behind the Every Student Succeeds Act. And this is roughly now we're looking at 2015-16, and this is also an implementation of the Obama administration. So we see that now there is a movement to maybe revisit and re-examine this idea of formalized testing, standardized testing, regulated testing not only in our country, but in our states and also at the school level. Many states at this time would also start implementing a cap. Of course, the last thing I do want to mention before I get back to my written notes here is the year 2020. This is the pandemic, and we as a nation, of course, several lawmakers that went through this pandemic. I'm a freshman. This is my first term. We had a huge issue with education, and this real issue, this real tragedy in some ways that we lost the instruction time. I was a teacher at the time. I'm over here trying to teach. Concepts that I already had a difficult time in my overcrowded classroom. Now I have to, have 60 little bubbles on a computer screen who all ended up turning their cameras off after the first 2 weeks, and I'm just looking at a blank screen. And I did that for a whole year, as did several other educators who are sitting in this committee. We know that we had significant issues when it came to the loss of instruction time during the pandemic, and now in this post-pandemic era that we're in, it's a huge issue. It's a problem that we want to address today, and it's something that we should consider as lawmakers. How do we make up for the loss of instruction time during this pandemic crisis that we all experience as a state, as a country, and as a human society, as a human species? So now we'll review the important specifics of this bill. First, this bill seeks to place a limit on certain types of tests given in our public schools. According to state and local mandates, Nevada students are required to receive a determined amount of time spent in our schools annually, but we know that formalized testing takes away valuable time from instruction and diverts it towards testing. This bill seeks to place a 2% cap on the amount of instructional time allotted towards the preparation and administration of certain formalized testing in our public schools. You may ask which test this legislation will be applicable to. This test will not apply to AP testing, CTE testing, or teacher-created evaluations, which are good, especially to those that teachers create themselves, where they evaluate the students in their classrooms. Federal and state mandated tests cannot be eliminated, but will be impacted by prep and administration time. District-adopted tests are not required by law and can be eliminated if need be. By creating this cap and eliminating assessments that are not required, our state's public school students will see an increase in the amount of in-class instruction time available to them. And it is our strong belief that in doing so, we will create better performance and educational outcomes for our students. At this time, I would like to turn things over to my co-presenter, Dr. Brenda Pearson, who will go a bit deeper into how this test cap will be implemented and what kinds of outcomes we will hope to see through this testing reform. So, Dr. Pearson.
Thank you, Dr. Brenda Pearson, for the record. Assembly Bill 296 really seeks to prioritize instructional time in our classrooms. Excessive testing in our schools has always been a concern of this body. And many of you who have been around know that this comes in front of you every session. But there is a finite amount of time in class where students should be learning. State law requires students to receive a certain number of hours of instruction annually, but student assessments continually take away from that time when students should be learning. I want to remind you of a few facts that were presented by the Clark County School District last week in front of the Joint Money Committees. Only 25% of Black students and 18% of English learners in elementary schools are proficient in reading and writing. Only 8% of Black students and 2% of English learners are proficient in middle schools are proficient in mathematics. And only 8% of Black students and 2% of English learners in 10th grade are proficient in science. So the solution to these extremely low proficiency rates is not to expand testing, but to expand the amount of time that our students have with instruction. In front of you is a list of 10 federal and state mandated assessments. Together, these assessments span K-12 and align with the federal ESSA requirements and Nevada state statute. The list of 10 assessments, though, is only the tip of the iceberg. For you fellow teachers, we all know this. There are layers of assessments offered in schools, and this is a very slippery slope. Districts add assessments so they can practice for the state assessments, and schools add assessments to the district assessments to practice for the state and district assessments. It is a pyramid of assessments that are taking place in our schools and pull away from the time that students should be learning. The highlighted assessments you see on the screen are just an example of some of the extra assessments that CCSD offers. There's no quality or judgment on the assessments you see. Our concern is that these assessments take away from the valuable instructional time. We need to place guardrails in order to maximize student instructional time. Assembly Bill 296 places a 2% limit on the amount of annual instructional time that students can spend conducting or preparing for assessments. CCSD published a document on testing time that is cited in one of the documents that has been shared with you. In this report, it says that the average student in CCSD spends 3.5% of their school year on assessments. But that is only taking assessments. We all can remember the time when we would do boot camps for SBACs or CRTs or ACT. Those are not included within that 3.5% of the instructional year. This is way too much time taken away from our students. So federal and state assessments are mandated, as Assemblyman De Silva said, and they cannot be adjusted. But what we do have control over, and what you have control over, is the amount of instructional time that can be taken away by districts and given to assessments. We must maximize and prioritize our instructional time in our classroom, and Nevada must reclaim our students' time that has been hijacked by assessments. A reduction in the amount of time on assessments from 3.5% to 2%, now this is only for the assessments, the act of giving the assessment, that earns you back 18 hours or 30 minutes per week of instructional time. That is not including practicing. I want to make sure that we have conversations constantly about the reason why, the benefit of increasing student time within the classroom. This is an easy way to, within the parameters that we have within the school day, increase instructional time. So I want to review the three components that are really included within this bill. The first is Assembly Bill 296 defines instructional time to be the time during a school day used for providing instruction to a pupil and excludes time spent conducting or preparing for examinations or assessments. That's part one. The second part is it places a 2% limit on the total number of annual minutes of attendance required for a student. And last, it provides exceptions to the rule. So some assessments that are not included in this 2% max are assessments that comply with federal law for IDEA or special education students, as well as Equal Educational Opportunities Act for those students who are English learners. Additionally, students who are participating in AP courses, CTE programs, and Read by Grade 3 program. Thank you.
And at this time, Madam Chair, we'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And, this issue has been discussed a lot, and I know it was discussed last session as well. And I'm just wondering, I know Section 2, there's existing language that the department shall adopt regulations for examinations and assessment. And I know we did that in Bill SB 353 of last session, and significant amount of money over the biennium to the tune of like $250,000 was appropriated to the DOE. Have they adopted those regulations? Are you seeing changes? And I know we have someone from the DOE here if you want to phone a friend. Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot, but that's why you're here.
Good afternoon, Chair. Katie Broughton from the Nevada Department of Education. I would have to do some research on that. Can you say the details again?
Yes, over the last biennium, it was Senate Bill 253, and in fiscal year 2021-22, it was appropriated $65,364, and in fiscal year 22 to 23, it was $187,500. So over $250,000 was appropriated to the DOE to establish regulations. So it's that Section 2. It's in the NRS 390.805. Is hereby amended to read as follows: the department shall adopt regulations for examinations and assessments administered pursuant to this chapter to be required to the Board of Trustees. So I hate that we keep coming back to do the same thing even when the money was appropriated. So I don't think that that's been done, and that's why we're here again. So I just would like to, if you could come back to me and let me know the status of that. Okay, with that, I will open questions to other members. Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask a question. So, having been on this committee since 2019, this has been a discussion many times about the testing. So I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So on your slide that showed the federal and state mandated assessments, those can't be adjusted, and that doesn't apply to the 2% cap. And then your example, the Clark County School Districts, those 4 tests in yellow, that would apply to the 2%. And then you also have the exceptions for AP, Read by 3, CTE, IDEA, and the EEOA. Okay, so I want to make sure that's my first question. And then just a secondly, just out of curiosity, how does a teacher account for, how much I don't know how they determine how much of their day, hour by hour that they're spending on this. How do they keep track of that? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Brenda Pearson, for the record. I am going to answer your first question and then ask Assemblyman Silva to answer the second. In front of you, you all have a document that looks like this, and what I tried to do was add more detail to your point on the assessments that are included within this legislation. The first page that you have really does detail the assessments that are included within the 2%. Okay.
We like to save trees whenever we can, so we're looking at them. Okay, please.
So the first page specifically dictates the amount or outlines the amount of, or the number of assessments that are included within the 2% max. On the second page, what we have done is these are the exceptions. They delineate the read by grade 3 assessments along with English language assessments, and then also college and career ready assessments, which are the AP and the CTE. Additionally, there's the special education assessments that are not included in this list, but because that's really an individual specific assessments that need to be given. On the last page that you will see are the district and or school required assessments. These are examples of what you will find within the schools and the districts. So these were pulled from Washoe County School District as well as Clark County School District. The district and or school required assessments can be removed to hit that 2% max. These are decisions that need to be made by the districts to determine what needs to be assessed on an annual basis. The first page are the federal, and these cannot be removed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, I'm going to go to the judiciary members first. So I will start with Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. I will go to Assemblywoman Hanson and Assemblywoman Moscow, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this again. I know it has been talked about a lot, but testing is a real issue, and it seems to be going up rather than down, which is disappointing. So my question is similar to my colleagues, but my first part of my question is, how will this be tracked? Because I am concerned that even if we say this is on the districts, it will then be put on to teachers to track your minutes, and then teachers have another thing they have to log, and it's just another thing on the plate that takes away from actual instruction. So could you just give us your plan or your vision for that?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. That is something that we have considered. You know, when we first drafted this bill, we really wanted to make this a work in progress. We know that it's not, addressing the totality of the issue of standardized testing in Nevada, but we wanted to work with the districts and the state Department of Education to come up with some kind of way of creating some sort of accountability as to how and when that 2% cap is met. So we're still working on that, and and if need be, I am willing to put an amendment in there with more sort of expressed intents as to how we can go about creating that sense of accountability. And I'm willing to work with you on that, Assemblywoman, if you would like to.
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
And then just, if I may, my second part of my question is, I love this chart that you laid out because I think it makes it very clear all of the tests that are going on. I'm concerned that even the federally and the state mandated tests may be more than 2%. I don't know. I've never sat down and actually calculated. But my question is, what happens if those make up more than 2%? Are we setting up districts to fail because they can't reduce below that threshold?
Brenda Pearson for the record. I did the calculations, and they are less than 2%.
And thank you again for Ruben De Silva for the record. Thank you again for the question, Assemblywoman. So the 2% cap is something that we just make it up. It's actually something that has been addressed by the academy, research institutions, some of our most dynamic universities that are doing research in education, and it was also a recommendation that was made by the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, that a 2% cap is sort of the number that you want to work with here. When we look at the actual hours at play with this cap in place for the 7th to 12th grade level, that's the one that I'm more familiar with as a high school teacher. This still leaves you with about 20 hours roughly of time that you can then utilize towards the preparation and the execution and administration of tests. It's a lot of time, 20 hours over the course of a school year. So I think that we're good there in accordance to the recommendations and the guidelines that we're following. And I know that the researcher, who she is, Dr. Pearson here, has actually gone in and seen that more than likely the number is below that 2% cap. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I share your concerns and the educators' concerns about the testing. It's just onerous, and I think back to when I was in school in the 60s and the 70s, and this just wasn't there. And so I certainly see the concern. And specific to this bill, on page 3 of section 1, sub 3, when we talk about instruction, class is instructional time, the 98%. I have huge concerns that kids aren't getting enough recess, and I think that's a huge component to the learning environment. So when we say 98% of the in classes instructional time, are we going to count recess as part of instructional time, even though it's not actually indoors per se in a class? I'm hoping that's the interpretation. If it's not, are we going to see a reduction in recess time? If I could just ask that, and then just a quick follow-up, Chair.
Brenda Pearson for the record. I'm going to actually ask the Department of Education to confirm, but I believe instructional time does not include recess time within the school day. So it takes away that recess time out of that calculation. But I would like to have NDE confirm.
Please.
This is Katie Broughton from the Nevada Department of Education. I was hoping Asher was going to save me. I would have to double check to see the definition of instructional time.
Asher can save you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So I obviously can't opine on the Department of Education's internal procedures, but the way that this bill is written, since the 98% is calculated on the basis of how much time spent in class is instructional time, since time spent in recess would not be time in class, it wouldn't count against that 98%. So spending time on recess would not put you under that 98% cap. That would be effectively free time outside of the time measured by this cap.
And Ruben De Silva for the record. Very quickly, I just wanted to address that issue. It was one that came up, and as the bill sponsor, I was concerned about it. And from the working with the stakeholders, working with some legal minds on this, it seemed to be that instruction time was the time that you spent on during the school day with the children. The recess was not a part of that. I know that's been also an ongoing debate about expanding the amount of recess children can get, that brain break that they need. And from everything that we saw, including on some of the national opinions on this, recess is something separate. That's where you can have an extended recess that's different from the mandated amount of hours that you need to utilize towards the direct instruction of children. That is something that we do have a policy and written language on. I know, again, I'm a high school teacher, so I believe in my district, Clark County, it's about 990 hours of hours need to be utilized towards the direct instruction of students, and there are different hours for other grade levels. But it is separate from what I at least interpret, and we did take that into consideration while we were drafting the language for this bill. Thank you.
And thank you, Assemblyman De Silva, for that, and legal counsel, because yes, we would not want to be out of sync with our speaker's bill, AB 164, that was the Outdoor Education Advisory Council. So this looks like we could be in harmony. Thank you.
Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Moscow.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. I do appreciate the intent of the legislation, but I know there's also a balance when it comes to summative assessments came because we were ignoring our most marginalized youth back then, and then also that formative assessments are supposed to inform instruction to support summative for our youth. And if I look at the assessments listed, like the WIDA screener, I'm pretty sure is supposed to determine when students come if they can access English language learner courses. And then the PSAT as well allows young people to get full ride scholarships based on their scores. So just wondering, I know you had mentioned that it would be different between districts. So do you see it as it will be different between the schools as well? How will we make sure just that all youth have access still?
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Ruben De Silva for the record. I'll let our test expert, get on the VITA question, but I'll give you an example of the PSAT. That's something that teachers brought up with me. in Clark County. And at my school, Rancho High School, several teachers, we get together, we talk about, we all know this as educators, that we test too much, and that sometimes we're just burdened with testing that removes us from teaching. We mandate the PSAT at the 10th grade level. Every single 10th grader has to take the test, at my school. And that's another example of time lost, I believe, because there's some students who will utilize that time to actually work through the test, actually take it seriously, and get those scores that then make them eligible for the National Merit Scholarship. We know that, but we also know that probably the majority, are not, and it just bubbling C down the bubble seat, the answer seat there, or are not taking the test. I was looking at the test actual packets of the students who were turning them into me. And I would mention this year after year after year. Some students wouldn't even do anything. It would just be a couple bubbles here and there. This is the majority of students now. And that's on the ground sort of analysis. And this was something that was confirmed by my colleagues from school to school to school to school. And this is exactly what we mean by having to force teachers to administer these tests that are taken away from class time. So that's my perspective on the PSAT. And this is something that I think will be unique to Clark County. But, Dr. Pearson, if you could...
Yes. Brenda Pearson for the record. Yes, I understand your concern, Assemblywoman. So first of all, formative assessments are not included within. Those are teacher-based assessments that inform clearly what is going to be done on the summative, as well as what instruction is given during the school day. So those are not included within this. So those wouldn't be calculated into the 2%. That being said, we want to make sure things like the WIDA screener is available, right? But that is going to be a district requirement or a district decision to make, right? We wanted to specifically bifurcate the number of, or the assessments that were federally and state mandated versus those that are not. And the WIDA screener is not a federally mandated or state mandated assessments. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable and shouldn't be used. We just want to make sure that that 2% maximum is adhered to. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. My question was along those same lines, just making sure that I was understanding correctly that none of the tests actually have a grade. That is, the grade is still something that is in the teacher's control. So thank you so much for that clarification. My second question, I have a feeling somebody from the Department of Ed gets to come up again. So I kind of feel bad for her. It actually has to do with some language that's currently on page 4, and it's in the current language. It's important to know that. It has to do with the waiver that's mentioned in the current law, in particular on lines 23 and 24. My question has to do with, do we know if any waivers have in fact been granted? And if so, how many with the current law that has been enacted? Or if that's if it's still too new to know that information? And then I already know I'm going to have a follow-up after that.
Thank you, Katie Broughton, Nevada Department of Education. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Anderson. Because that is in response to the regulations that I need to research, I will follow up in the same research with information regarding the waivers.
And if you would get that to me, and then I will distribute it, but in a timely fashion. We are right up against that deadline, so thank you.
In my follow-up, and thank you so much, Chair. My question is also for Assemblymember De Silva in this case. If, in fact, we do not know what those are, if there is a way to maybe ask the department or even direct through this language with amendment that has to be part of the waiver. How much currently is the district asking for, or how much time is currently utilized for that, and that's why they're coming. I don't know what that waiver looks like, but I think that would be a smart addition to have, is that the district has to be aware of it on their own as well. So just something to put out there.
Thank you. And we're going to just do a quick 1-minute recess, so don't go anywhere. We're just going to take a 1-minute recess.
This is a really good time to call this meeting back to order. Okay, we'll see. We'll begin with, and thank you for allowing those on judicial understanding. They have a big meeting that they're running off to as well. I do have a couple of questions, but do we have any other questions from the committee members that remain? Assemblywoman Torres, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you, Dr. Pearson, for taking the time to meet with me ahead of hearing this bill and talking to me more about what this would look like and what the goals of it are. And I really appreciate this. You know, as an educator, we've continued to see the amount of testing required just increase and increase and increase, and districts continuing to require more and more testing on educators. I mean, I can think about a couple of the assessments that are here that, you know, would take days, and then we had to, like, if somebody was out, I was responsible for the testing, not an assessment coordinator. It was me that had to make sure that kid was tested and then create a testing environment. So maybe you're taking some of these tests for like literally 2 weeks, and that's taking a lot of time out of our classroom and out of the education and instruction. But we're still trying to hit those goals, right? We're still trying to teach those standards. So I definitely think that there is a need for us to limit the amount of testing that we're giving it, while still ensuring we're meeting our state and federal requirements, right? Because this bill doesn't do that, and it doesn't include the IEP testing. So our students with special needs will still be able to ensure that they're getting the testing that they need to provide to ensure we're meeting their educational goals. The only recommendation I have, as I look at this language, I do feel that we need to strengthen a little bit to prevent there from being the misunderstanding that it would include curriculum, the curriculum assessments. I can think, a school might say you are required to, my school uses Springboard, and so we say you have to give your embedded assessment every quarter, right? That is technically a school requirement, and it's a school required assessment, but it is a part of the curriculum. And my understanding, and please clarify me if I'm wrong, the intent is not to capture those curriculum assessments that educators are using to drive their instruction, but rather to capture kind of the other tests.
Dr. Brenda Pearson, for the record, that's correct.
Yeah, Ruben De Silva for the record. Thank you again, Assemblywoman Torres. That's a very important consideration. I know that the goal here really in this language is to really cap and curtail the amount of district mandated and some. It's really district mandated tests. The school issue was not brought up, but that is a concern. There are some formalized, almost standardized tests that schools will also give. But that is an important consideration that we will look at here. Thank you for bringing that up, Assemblywoman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just very quickly, and in that, you might want to make sure we're defining curriculum, because I could see that somebody says that everything is a part of the curriculum, because I've seen that term misused a little too frequently lately in educational settings. And so, no, not every assessment that you give is a part of the curriculum, but I want us to be very intentional about creating that definition and ensuring we're really hitting that target.
Okay, thank you, Assemblywoman. Other questions? Otherwise, I'll jump in with a couple for myself. And thank you for bringing this, Assemblyman and Dr. Pearson. Thank you for being here. As a former member of a school board, which I've actually said a lot this week because we have a lot of educational things going on. Testing time has constantly been something before us, and how do we reduce it and meet those requirements and so on. So this is really making sure that happens, and I think that's best for our students and best for our staff, quite frankly, as well. I just wanted, for one clarifying question. So, and this is in the bill. I just want to make sure I followed it correctly. So prep time that would ordinarily happen, let's say for the PSAT or the SBAC or whatever, mandated tests. Well, no, PSAT is not mandated, but let's say the SBAC or something along those lines. Prep time for those tests do not count. Did I say that right?
Ruben De Silva for the record. Madam Vice Chair, it actually does count towards the total amount, the 2%. So what we're looking at here is reducing the amount from 3.5%, which we see, maybe even a little bit upwards of that, where we actually administer the test and prepare for the test. So all those workshops and those test prep courses you're mandated to take, to get ready for that test that we implement on our students. That is also part of the 20% cap. I mean,
I said it wrong.
No,
it's the 2%. I said it wrong. What I meant was it didn't count in the it doesn't count piece. So that was a double negative kind of in my thought process. But yes, that's what I meant. That it is not exempt.
Mm-hmm.
There's a better question. How about that?
Yeah, that
Yes.
is correct,
All right.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I didn't say it right.
And
so.
the real intent then, the goal here is to and again, I think it's important to get this on the record. And especially in this post-pandemic world that we're living in, this has become a growing concern amongst educators that we lost so much instruction time during that crises. And this is one way that we could actually fix it by just putting a cap on the test. This doesn't mean that we're not, removing tests, period. We're actually putting a cap on the amount of preparation and time that's spent administering those highly formalized, standardized tests that are regulated and we know are problematic, and we want to actually expand the amount of instruction time that's taking place. And this is why I mentioned the Elementary and Education Act 1965, which is still in law today. We just No Child Left Behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act. These are just re-implementations of that act. It was done for a specific purpose to test and measure student performance. I mean, I think it came from a place of goodwill, but we overdid it.
And continue to, quite frankly.
Continue to, and so what this bill is doing, it's not a perfect bill, but it's addressing the issue by looking to capping and curbing the amount of growth that we see, for sure, but also keeping some time in place there for the actual preparation and administration of those tests that could still give us some sort of ability to measure student performance levels.
Yeah, no, and thank you. I appreciate that. That takes me to the second question I had is, knowing Dr. Pearson, the limited way that I do, you've probably considered this in coming up with this. Because one of the things that gets my attention in this is those tests, like for dyslexia, for an example, or the tests that you give, like in Washoe, we have testing at certain points for the gifted and talented program, and that was something to do to ensure equity in those programs. So it happens at the third grade, for an example, for all, and that's a district thing, but it's also something that's really important for the child, and that balance. It just makes me think about, are we striking that best? I hear you with the 2%. I think we do test too much. I think if we took a survey, everybody in here would say that. So there's no question. It's a matter of balancing that, but not taking those important supports away, especially from some of the vulnerable populations that might need it.
Dr. Brenda Pearson, for the record. Yes, that has been taken into consideration. So GATE is generally under the umbrella of special education. And so that would not apply under the IDEA exception. Okay.
So something like testing for dyslexia, for an example, or any of that?
Brenda Pearson, for the record. I think that is a district decision, because that doesn't fall into the category of special education.
It wouldn't be IDEA.
So in the same way that the WIDA screener would, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the balance in that, because we want the WIDA screener when it's appropriate, and we want to test a child for a learning disability, whether it's dyslexia or otherwise. And I don't want schools to be in a position where they're picking and choosing. Well, we can't give this to this kid because that's going to get. It's that balance in there. So we got to find it, because it's important. This is important legislation. Yes. So absolutely, let me say that. I just don't want to take away from some of those students that we might need to identify they need some help.
Yes, and Brenda Pearson, for the record, we completely agree with you, right? The point is to prioritize our instructional time to make sure that students are able to get what they need, right? And back to Assemblyman De Silva's discussion about assessments, we really need to ensure that students are not sitting down practicing to take a bubbled-in test, right? You can do formative assessments, and you can do project-based learning that really assesses the ability of these students to apply the standards and the knowledge. When you are simply bubbling in tests, that does not help you grow in any way, shape, or form, right? And so that is what this is fighting against. But to your point, I think we need to really think about whether that's the dyslexia screener or the WIDA screener. We need to make sure that those are included. But maybe a further conversation.
Right, exactly. So thank you for that. And I was just on the record, the single most important thing we can do for most children is instructional time. It's time in the classroom with a good teacher. I mean, that is certainly the single most important thing we can do for a child education-wise. So thank you for that. So yeah, let's chat about that piece. That's the only piece that kind of got my attention. Assemblywoman Torres?
Thank you, Vice Chair. And sorry, I've obviously read the bill a number of times. And as I'm looking at it, I'm wondering if maybe we should put language that it should be like the average of like that school's time or like that grade level or something like along those lines, just because I'm thinking about like the practicality of calculating it per pupil, because in a setting, we're not generally not testing every kid for dyslexia. We're not testing every kid for WIDA example. So like we might want to consider maybe like an average or some easier way to measure that, just for practicality purposes. Additionally, as I look at Section 1, Sub 4. I know we have exclusions for like AP, CTE, and a couple other groups. I think we might want to include international baccalaureate testing in there as well. Thank you.
Yes, we can definitely look into doing that. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman. Ruben De Silva for the record. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Assemblywoman Torres. See, you jump back in again, and guess who else wants to jump in? Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes. Anyway, okay. So as your questions were being answered, I did have one more thought. I just want to make sure that this is also clear. This is not for an after-school tutoring program or for, like in my school district in the secondary, we have what I would call homeroom. Right? I think we call it PASS or something like that right now at our school. But let's say that a student had signed up to have that be a test-taking skills class. That is not being considered in this language. I just want to make sure that that's clearly stated as well.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Ruben De Silva for the record. Yes, you're 100% absolutely right, Assemblywoman Anderson. This is only for the allotted school day, which is in a county statute or county policy. So yes, those are actually encouraged. If you want to actually take a test, and prep for it, and there's an after-school program that your school implements, or there's a study group that's set up, or if the principal decides to bring in a contractor or a resource, that's actually encouraged, and that would be outside of the confines of this legislation.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. Committee members, any other questions? For those of us not in judice? Assemblywoman MacArthur. No, you're good. Okay. Okay, thank you. Want to make sure we give you that opportunity. Okay, so seeing no further questions, I think we'll just ask you to take your seats, and we'll see if we have any testimony in the room in support. We can't go to Vegas, but we'll be going to the phone lines in just a moment. So anyone here to testify in support of AB 296, please come forward at this time. You know the routine, but I'll say it anyway. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Assemblywoman Marie Nisus, M-A-R-I-E-N-E-I-S-E-S-S, and I'm the president of the Clark County Education Association. And while I am in support of AB 296, I'd like to read into the record a letter from a frontline educator. My name is Amanda Fisher. I have been a public school teacher in the Clark County School District for 18 years. I'm a proud member of the Clark County Education Association, and more importantly, I'm a parent of one middle school student and one elementary school student in the CCSD. I am writing in support of Assembly Bill 296. As a teacher, I know the importance of instructional minutes in the classroom. I also see the exhaustion of students when they are expected to formally test so often. Teachers are trained in assessment practices and know what is best for their students. Teachers already have ways to assess their students which provide data on mastery of standards and the content to help drive instruction. Too many additional district-mandated assessments use up a lot of instructional time. As a parent, I see the stress my children deal with having big, important assessments to take. I also see the frustration when data isn't available soon after testing so that my children have an idea of how they are doing. Having more time with their teachers for instruction and conferencing would be a more valuable use of their classroom time. Thank you for considering my thoughts as you discuss Assembly Bill 296. Sincerely, Amanda Fisher, veteran educator at CCSD and a proud member of the Clark County Education Association. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and please thank her for sending her remarks. Anybody else here to testify in support? Okay, seeing no one, we aren't going to Vegas. We don't have that possibility, but everyone has a chance to call in. So BPS, we'll see if there's anyone on the phone lines to testify in support of AB 296.
Callers, if you would like to testify in support of AB 296, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. One moment, Vice Chair.
Thank you, BPS.
Caller with the last three digits 005, you're unmuted on our end. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings, committee chair and members. My name is Christopher DiPaolo, staff for CCEA, and I'm reading on behalf of member Carrie Taylor. I'm a veteran educator in Clark County School District, a national board certified teacher, and a member of Clark County Education Association. I am writing in support of AB 296. I serve as the site testing coordinator at my elementary school. In the 3 weeks since spring break and over the next 4 weeks, 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders on my campus have taken or are taking 3 MAP assessments and 5 to 7 separate portions of the SBAC summative assessment. Both are mandated at the federal, state, or district level. Some students finish quickly or take the average amount of time, but others take multiple hours to complete each. For example, our 5th grade classes recently took the first of 2 parts of the SBAC science. Lunch was scheduled for 2.5 hours after active testing time, but less than half of them had completed the assessment in that time. Spread this out over 10 days in the 4th quarter, and students are missing out on very significant amounts of critical instructional time. The MAP assessments alone are administered 3 times each year, with many additional hours dedicated to test preparation and instruction. In CCSD, students spend an average of 3.5% of their instructional time taking assessments. When we are looking for students' best efforts, getting the biggest bang for our buck, and then using these results to judge our school's effectiveness, it is simply too much. By imposing a time cap of 2% on administering mandated assessments, we will recover 18 hours of critical instructional time every year. It would make a great difference. Please support AB 296. Thank you for your consideration in deciding to do what is best for our students. Sincerely, Carrie Taylor.
Thank you, caller. BPS, do we have anyone else?
Yes, hi. My name is Sue Dittman. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Education Committee. I am calling because I am in support of Assembly Bill 296, which is requesting the cap on the federal, state, and district testing. I'm currently a special education teacher, and I have witnessed students experiencing burnout, test anxiety, and simply just marking answers on the test. So, I'm trying to figure out data. So a reduction in testing to provide more time on instruction and an opportunity to implement a variety of assessments to assess our students that I feel will be more effective. So thank you for your time, and I urge you to support the passage of Assembly Bill 296.
Thank you so much. Would you mind repeating your name one more time, please, for our secretary?
Sue Goodman.
Got that? Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Goodwin. We appreciate your call. Is there anyone else, BPS?
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Spicer. I'm a staff member at the Clark County Education Association. I am reading on behalf of frontline educator Isabel Abel. Greetings, committee chair and members. My name is Isabel Abel. I'm a kindergarten teacher in the Clark County School District and a member of the Clark County Education Association. I am writing to you to ask you to support AB 296. Regarding the amount of instructional time we teachers currently spend on assessing our students, I am mandated testing such as the MAP test and the iReady test. These are probably the most stressful times my students have during the school year. Every time we must administer these assessments, I must allocate at least 5 days to test and perform makeups. This represents 2 hours a day each day for a whole week. That's 10 hours where I am not able to pull small group instruction. As I mentioned, I am a kindergarten teacher and my students need more support than other grades. The amount of time that I must allocate for each round of assessments takes away too much time from their instruction. If the assessment time is reduced with a cap, I will have more opportunity to continue working with my students on the skills they need to practice the most to be successful and have adequate growth by the end of the school year. Assembly Bill 296 would ensure that teachers like me recover several days of instruction for their students by capping non-mandated, unnecessary testing to 2% of total instructional time each year. Thank you for your time and consideration. Isabel Abel.
Thank you so much. Anybody else, BPS, in support?
Good afternoon. This is Anna Binder, ANNABINDER.
I'm calling in to support AB 296. I echo pretty much everyone's words, and the two kids in elementary school, and an 8th grader and a junior. So my junior just took the for the state. And then my 8th grader has been SBAC testing this week, and so has my 4th grader. But what's always been really concerning to me is the math testing. They test 3 times a year for that in elementary in K to 5. And I can give you a great example. My 1st grader, during his winter math testing, it showed he only growed 1%. But that's because he has an IE. He does not like doing non-preferred tasks. And despite how much growth he actually has, he probably shouldn't have taken it, but they got him to do it. And then yesterday I got a little text message from my 8th grader. He was done with the SBAC in about 25 minutes, if that tells you how much time he cared to actually take the test. So anything we can do to reduce those burdens, not just on our educators, but our students, is greatly welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it looks like for our support, we have time for probably about one more caller. If we have anyone else, BPS?
Callers, if you've recently joined the call, please press star 9 now to express opposition and support for Assembly Bill 296. One moment, Vice Chair.
Okay, thank you, BPS.
Caller with the last 3 digits 577. You're unmuted on our end. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. Calling in support of the bill. We've been working on the issue of over-testing at least since the 2017 session with various ideas. And when there's a good idea that comes up that's going to help our educators and our students in our classrooms, we're going to support it. We appreciate Assemblymember De Silva for interesting mechanism in order to prioritize instructional time in our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Okay, that's right. Almost exactly at 20 minutes. So we'll thank you for all. And if you've wanted to call in and make comments and didn't have a chance to, please feel free to send your remarks to our committee secretary. And you have until 24 hours after today, after this time here, to get those, and we'll make sure those remarks are on the record. So thank you so much. And now we'll go to opposition. Is there anyone here in opposition of Assembly Bill 296? Please come forward as you are. And all of you know the routine, but I'll say it anyway. Please say and state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. Submitted a letter of opposition that outlines, I think, much of the discussion that occurred today with the committee. A couple of things I want to highlight, beyond that is it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot that needs to be worked out to make this make sense as far as tracking. There's a lack of clarity on what assessments we're even talking about here. And, I think the conversation around GATE sort of triggered me a little bit in some of these screeners, right, and how they relate to equity. And a personal story really briefly was in the 4th grade, I was in a Clark County School District school, and I would watch students walk out the door, and I asked my teacher one day, where are those kids going? Those were the smart kids. And he said, oh, they're in GATE. I said, what's GATE? He goes, well, you have to take a test to test into it, and I don't know. And I said, well, can I take that test? He said, well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. I went home. I told my parents about it. I said, I don't know what this thing is, but I would like to take the test. Checked the test and ended up in the 99th percentile in at least one of them. And I had to self-advocate for myself, right, in that moment as a fourth grader to be able to have access. So when we're talking about some of these screeners, some of these opt-in, it really is a question of equity. The only other thing that I would like to add that I don't feel like was discussed in an adequate way in this conversation today was the consequences that are associated with this policy. Yes, yes, certainly we need to continue to look at our assessment framework. Does it make sense? Does it give us the information that we need in order to know how our kids are doing and what needs to be adjusted along the way? But if I'm understanding correctly, the consequence is removing funding. And to me, it just is inappropriate to even consider that as some policy that this committee or that the legislature would put forward at this time. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Please go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Przinski, here representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And I want to echo some of the things that my colleague had to say about this whole bill, but the mechanics of the bill are tough. I don't know how you really go about figuring out 2%, and along with that critical amount of time is money attached to it. If you look at, I think it's Section 1, Sub 3, the apportionment, you lose the money if you are taking too much time with the testing. So I think the mechanics of it are difficult, and I think it's going to fall right on the shoulders of our teachers in the classroom trying to monitor how much time they're spending on this, and they have enough to do. So from that standpoint, I thought Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch's question about, who's going to keep track of all of this was right on target, and it's going to be some pressure to make sure that the information is correct because, as I said, money is tied to it. So, any rate, I appreciate the Assemblyman talking with us about the bill, and he was so gracious to try to go through the bill with us, but we see a lot of issues with this, and tying money to time and putting that one more thing on our teachers, I think, is too much. So anyway, we're opposed to the bill for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Tess Opferman here on behalf of the Washoe County School District. First, I want to thank Assemblyman De Silva for bringing this bill forward and for the conversation that we've been able to have around it. The Washoe County School District absolutely agrees that the testing requirements right now are incredibly burdensome for our teachers. They are spending a lot of time prepping for those tests and taking those tests, and it's very difficult. And in fact, the Washoe County School District's legislative platform reads, one of the calls we have is for the elimination of non-essential and duplicative testing, reporting, and redundant processes to maximize educators' instructional time. So I just want to say that this is incredibly important to us. That said, we unfortunately are in opposition to this bill for all of the reasons stated. We're very concerned about the funding element. Our school districts are already fighting against a shoestring budget, and we cannot imperil it further with a punitive approach to addressing classroom time. We're absolutely concerned with the tracking element. How exactly do we track this, and are we requiring our teachers to be the ones that are tracking their time? We think this, if anything, could be putting an increasing burden on them rather than easing any burdens. We're also concerned about the test prep itself. Some test prep is required, and we do have tests that are required by ESSA and NDE. We're concerned that higher income students and schools have more access to technology and will use out of school time for test prep, while low income families and schools will simply fail the test and face the consequences of funding cuts. Currently, our school district estimates that the schools where more than 2% of instructional time is being used for test preparation are also likely to be the schools where students have the least resources and require the most time for prep. So we're really concerned about the potential inequity of this bill. Finally, we must acknowledge the elephant in the room here. By attempting to address class time while exempting the time taken for state and federally mandated testing is tying one hand behind our backs. State mandated testing should strategically align with district goals rather than be given special protections from bills like this. So with all of that, I just want to emphasize that we very much value this conversation and the issue brought forward. It's absolutely an issue for the Washoe County School District. We just don't want to threaten our limited school funding to address this issue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Anyone else here in the room testify in opposition? Okay, seeing none. BP. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Assemblywoman Thomas had a question. Was it for Ms. Offerman?
Well, actually, it was all for all three. The opposition. I'm just trying to understand the relevance of funding and educating our children. So, if the federal government or you can find more money by more testing, you would implement more testing in our schools at the sake of educating our children.
Either you can do paper, rock, scissors, whatever. Yes. Would you just talk a little bit about? Thank you, Assemblywoman. A little bit about that connection to the funding, if you would. Please. Is it the question?
Tess Opferman for the record, and maybe council might be the right person to answer this question. Specifically, we're looking at section 1, part 3, where it says the count of pupils for apportionment purposes is inclusive if less than 98% of the time the pupil spends in class instructional time. So we read that if more than 2% is spent on instructional time, the funding, the per pupil funding, the apportionment would be cut. And that's specifically what we're very concerned about.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Why don't we ask council to, that might make it clarify more just exactly what this language means in the proposed bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So yes, the Section 1 of the bill does tie the provision of a required amount of instructional time to funding. The count for apportionment purposes is decreased by the number of pupils who do not receive at least the minimum amount of instructional time during the school year. Additionally, Section 2 of the bill incorporates the existing requirement for the Department of Education to adopt regulations limiting the amount of testing and requires those regulations to include a similar limit on testing to carry out the instructional time requirement. But yes, Section 1 of the bill would not include in the count for apportionment purposes, so not fund any pupil who does not receive at least the minimum amount of instructional time during the school year.
So that being said, Assemblywoman Thomas, is there a question from there? Did that clarify your question, or did you want to have a further question? No, good. You're good? Okay. Thank you, Assemblywoman. Thank you so much for coming back up. And Assemblywoman Torres?
I guess I just want to express my frustration, though, that if districts are going to oppose any time that we have any type of teeth to a bill, I mean, that's exactly why districts have not followed through with other legislation. That's why we see that consistently. So, I think that it's really critical that there is some teeth, and maybe that's not it, but there has to be some teeth to this legislation, because otherwise districts will do what they currently do, which is just not implement legislation.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Torres. Okay, why don't we continue now with any opposition? Any opposition? BPS, do we have anyone on the phone line in opposition to Assembly Bill 296?
Vice Chair?
Yes.
The line is open and working, but there are no callers choosing to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. So now we'll go to neutral testimony. Anyone here in Carson City would like to testify neutral? You know the routine, but I'll say it anyway. Just please state and spell your name for the record, and please begin when you're ready.
My name is John Eppolito, and we are definitely, I'm with Protect Nevada Children. We definitely are for less testing in the schools, like almost everybody is in their right mind. And in fact, several sessions we have tried here in Carson City to get the SBAC test out of our schools. There's only 10 or maybe 11 states left that are doing the SBAC test. Remember when Common Core came in, all the states were supposed to use SBAC or PARC. Most states dropped it. Nevada was one of the few states to hang on, and the SBAC test, that's a ridiculous test. It's a 10-hour test where you're putting a kid in front of a computer for 10 hours, and who knows what they're doing. It's ridiculous. And in Oregon, there is one of the largest districts in the state. All the board members suggested parents opt their kids out of the SBAC test. That is because in Oregon, there is a law that allows parents to opt out. This year is the most calls and emails I've gotten from parents that Clark County supposedly is not allowing parents to opt out of the SBAC test this year. I've never had this many calls. You know I've been talking about it for a long time in Washoe County. This year's the worst. The other thing with that SBAC, I was just talking to Superintendent Ebert downstairs about this. It was just a coincidence. These entities, these alphabet entities, AIR, DRC, CREST, eMetric, that are stationed in or housed in DC and Silicon Valley, they get much more data than we get when kids take those tests. And the reason is because it's all electronic. That 10-hour test, they're able to tell when the kid gives up on that test by how much time delay, and those entities get it. Superintendent Ebert just told me downstairs if they want more data, they have to reach out to these entities. So that's another problem that Protect Nevada Children has with these tests, especially SBAC, and I think MAP. I think MAP it's a computer adaptive test. So I have twins. If I did allow my kids to take the SBAC, they wouldn't be taking the same test. My son would have different math questions than my daughter would have.
Mr. Eppolito, I'm sorry, we're over 2 minutes. Can you bring that to rapid, please,
Yes,
sir?
I can. So one of the entities that's most problematic is AIR, American Institute for Research.
Thank you, sir. Please go ahead.
Don Gallimore Sr., Gallimore, Protect Nevada Children, and basically this is something that we have been, the data collection, of course, we've been fighting for, over 12 years.
Okay, we're on testing, sir.
Yeah, well, the testing is the biggest part of it. We've seen SBAC come in as a psychological test, and all these tests for the minority communities are harmful. The testing that is already done, scientifically proven that minorities don't know some of the terminology that other people know. And so most of these tests that are presented to our minority children have no reference as to what it is. And we've been fighting DESA and SANE and AIR for all these many years because the American Institute for Research administers the SBAC and takes all the data from the SBAC and school climate testing. So they have all the data for their children. John Flanagan, who is a chief psychologist for AIR, was also a member of the eugenics groups. And so Pioneer Fund was used to increase birth, saying that they wanted to increase birth rates for superior groups. And now AIR claims to have the world's largest behavioral and social science research and evaluation organization. So we're looking at the world's largest and some of the things that AIR is doing, and we have to be very, very careful in what we present to them from our children. Testing is purely for profit. We've been fighting SBAC, the elimination of SBAC, and it's for profit, whether it be monetary or data mining. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Is anyone else here in Carson City would like to testify in opposition? Okay, seeing none. BPS, anyone on the phone lines? Neutral.
Vice Chair, the line is open and working.
That was it. Okay, neutral. There we are, neutral. Neutral testimony, I'm sorry. Neutral testimony on the phone lines. Thank you.
Vice Chair, the line is open and working. There are no callers choosing to provide testimony at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, will the bill sponsor like to come and have closing remarks?
Thank you again, Madam Chair, because you are the chair at the moment, and distinguished members of the Education Committee. Just a few remarks in closing. I did want to Thank all the stakeholders we're working with, including the districts. This again is a bill that is addressing a very complicated, complex issue, and there is no like one fix to it. We understand that this is a comprehensive approach that we need to take in the end. But the reality is that we do test our children way too much in our schools, and we have to do something about it. And this bill is taking that initial step forward. About the 2% cap, just want to say that there are several states that already have this in effect. I know for a fact that that Maryland, Ohio, and South Dakota have already implemented a 2% cap on testing, and it seems to be working well in those states. And they also have some significant teethed accountability policies there in place to actually address the issue with the funding. Yes, the bill does tie violating the 2% cap with monies being removed if that pupil has extended past that 2% limit. So that is an important, I think, a sort of guardrail and a sort of accountability piece that is necessary for our districts to implement. It's a significant one and it's real. We could have a conversation about that. I am, as the bill sponsor, willing to have a conversation with all stakeholders who are concerned about that matter. But I think it was very important for us to put a real sense of accountability in there, and this is the one that we went with, was the apportionment language. A few more things that I do want to discuss here. There was a comment brought up about tracking. At the high school level, of course, I think most schools in the Clark County School District at least do have a site testing coordinator who oversees the actual implementation and the administration of the test. The students are usually pulled out of class to take these tests. And I think those individuals would be the ones who would also track the actual data there in terms of the time limits and the time spent testing. It wouldn't be put on teachers. Again, I would have to ask for clarification for the lower level grades, but I do believe that most of the schools will have somebody that can do this. So it would not be necessarily placed upon teachers. And again, I'm willing to talk to stakeholders and anybody who is concerned about that topic and that matter. So that would be one of the things I do want to highlight in my closing remarks here. There was an issue. There was a question about equity and access to testing. I think this is a fair argument. It's an important one, addressing the equity issue. Some schools are going to have the resources to implement after-school programs, to implement a contract out to companies that can help with test taking. But I think there's also a significant counter argument to be made over here as well. We know that there's a lot of data that shows that that especially folks on the lower socioeconomic ladder and also ethnic minorities don't test as well, for a variety of reasons, including cultural reasons. There's issues with language access. There's issues with ELL students. There's issues with students who perform in lower percentages of the percentile of the ELA testing, so on and so forth. There are significant issues there, and we do not get the best estimates and engagement of or gauge those students' performance levels based upon these standardized tests. What is important is instruction time in the classroom and expanding that. I think across the board, whatever sort of university research you look at, academic research you look at, some of the actual data we can see from states who have implemented these caps, there is significant data there that shows that the instruction time does help in the overall performance of a student. And I think that is also something that is tremendously important to consider here. And lastly, I'll say that again, this bill isn't perfect. It isn't a catch-all. I know with my conversation with several of you while we were discussing this bill, and I'm surprised that it wasn't brought up. It's maybe because they left for other hearings, some of the individuals who brought this up. They said that this bill doesn't go far enough, that we should address some of the state testing and really put some teeth in sort of efforts in curbing the state-mandated tests as well. But I think, again, this is an ongoing conversation that we as educators, we as community members, as the people of the state should start in a more aggressive way pursuing a policy that addresses this matter. And this is not just for our young people. I'll say this in closing, our students. I don't know, my distinguished colleague, Assemblywoman Torres, brought this up in her own bill when she addressed the praxis issue for teachers themselves who have to take a test in order to get a license. I think we need to reform that. I don't know how my colleague there, I'm sorry, Ashton would feel. I'm sorry, I've been on a first name basis so much. Mr.
Our council,
Killian here,
yes.
our council feels about the LSAT. There are significant institutions that are looking at removing that as a prerequisite to even apply for law school. So again, we are having a greater conversation about testing, and does testing actually really gauge the sort of aptitude of an individual? and we should pursue that conversation. This bill is looking at addressing the fact that we overtest our kids, and we have to do something about it. We have to do something about it in a serious fashion. Yes, there is a apportionment question in place here. That is important, and we can look at addressing that. But we need to do something about it, and this bill does that. And again, if any stakeholders who have issues or concerns with this bill, please, my door is open. But let's do this for our young people. We test too much, and we need to address that in this legislative session.
Thank you, Assemblyman.
I will end.
It was almost as long as your presentation. All right. No, thank you for those closing comments, and thank you for all who participated. We're going to close the hearing now on AB 296 and go to our last agenda item, and that is for public comment. If we have anyone here in the room who would like to have an opportunity for public comment, please come forward at this time. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the phone lines. BPS, anyone would like on the phone lines would like to make a public comment?
Vice Chair, the line is open and working, but there is no callers choosing to provide public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, everyone, thank you so much. Our meeting is adjourned, and I know we will meet again. Let's just call it the call of the chair at this point. I don't want to see when our next meeting is going to be. Thank you so much, everybody. Ruben, I was like, Lord.